When the young manager raised the cup and, in a gesture of contempt, poured the hot liquid over the newly cleaned floor, the old man just stared, without saying a word, as the sound of the liquid spread across the marble like a whisper of humiliation. Laughter echoed around. The manager leaned over and said in a cold tone, "That's what you're good for, isn't it? Clean up." The old man took a deep breath, bent over and began to clean up, while everyone watched as if it was some kind of spectacle. No one imagined that that gesture would be the beginning of one of the most powerful turnarounds that company has ever witnessed. What no one knew was that the man being humiliated that morning was actually the true owner of everything there. If you want to know what happened in that auditorium and see the moment when arrogance met its own ruin, like this video and subscribe to the channel. The story you will hear will change the way you see respect and power. The sound of shoes echoed on the smooth marble of the lobby as the old man leaned over silently, the frayed cloth in his hands, mopping the floor as he had done for years. No one knew his name. Some called him the janitor, others just walked past him without even raising their eyes. He moved slowly, with the calm of one who has seen a lot, and yet he preferred silence to explanations. Every day, before the sun rose, he was there, removing the marks of the hurried footsteps of people who had never noticed his presence. The building had 23 floors of tinted glass, and every day that man cleaned every hallway, every elevator, every reflection left by anxious fingers on automatic doors. His movements were precise, almost ritual. He knew every corner, every difficult spot, every place where the light beat differently over the hours. On that particular morning, the lobby of the giant technology company seethed. It was the first day of the new operations manager, a young man full of confidence and expensive perfume, who flaunted his suit as if it were armor against the world. The older man just watched as the clock struck 8:30, the hour when the flow became a flurry of ambition and haste. He knew that this was the critical moment, when everyone rushed to prove something that no one had asked them. The new manager walked through the front door, talking loudly on the phone, laughing at something that only he thought was important. His voice echoed through the lobby, mixing with the sounds of heels hitting the floor and leather bags creaking. The old man hurried to clean up a small puddle of spilled coffee near the elevator, but before he could finish, the manager tripped lightly over the bucket and angrily turned around. His gaze was a cold blade, and the words came sharp. "Don't know your place? Look what you did. You got my shoes dirty." The old man tried to explain, but the man would not listen. In a gesture of contempt, he purposely knocked over the rest of the cafe on the freshly cleaned floor, saying that if he wanted to clean up, let him have more work. Laughter echoed from some close colleagues, young executives who seemed to be competing to see who could seem more indifferent to the humanity of others. The old man just bowed his head, picked up the cloth, and quietly began to rub again. His heart clenched, not out of anger, but out of a kind of ancient sadness, from realizing that nothing had changed. Even in a Moderna building, with state-of-the-art computers and people talking about inclusion and respect, human arrogance still smelled the same bitter smell as always. He remembered other decades, other faces, other cutting words. He remembered when, as a young man, he too had been treated like this. But at that time, he did not have the power to change anything, only to survive. Today was different. Today, he had chosen to be there, voluntarily, testing whether the values he had planted so long ago still held up. The answer lay before him, dripping on the cold floor. The manager snorted and gave one last blow. "You're fired, old man. You can take your things and disappear." Those words cut through the air like shattered glass. The janitor raised his face slowly, his eyes met the young man's, and for an instant something there faltered. There was something in that look, steady, serene, disconcerting. But the manager swerved, full of himself, thinking he had won. The old man collected his bucket, carefully wiped his hands with a handkerchief, and left without saying anything, only with the low noise of his footsteps disappearing down the hall. No one noticed that as they passed the gate, the security guards lowered their eyes, as if they knew that something sacred had been broken that day. The next morning was born with a strange glow. The sky was heavy. Grey clouds hung over the city like a silent promise of thunderstorm. Inside the building, however, there was a different energy. The company's large auditorium was packed. It was the day of the general meeting, the long-awaited return of the founder, the one that no one had seen for months, and about whom rumors were circulating that he would return with great changes. Some said that he had traveled abroad, others whispered that he was sick, but the truth is that no one knew for sure. The chairs were filled with tense executives, hurrying secretaries and curious young employees. There was a tension in the air, that kind of expectation that makes time seem slower. The new manager, sitting in the front row, straightened his jacket and smiled contentedly. He had done his cleaning and now hoped to impress the big boss. Next to him, other executives exchanged complicit glances, commenting in hushed tones about promotions and bonuses they expected to receive. The lights in the auditorium were strong, almost clinical, illuminating every face with a cruel clarity. On the stage there was a simple podium, a microphone and a huge screen still turned off. The room had a capacity of 500 people, and that day all the chairs were occupied. The lights went out for an instant. Silence took over the place, a silence so dense that it was possible to hear the collective breathing. On the stage, a shadow slowly appeared from behind the scenes. The silence deepened even more. When the man took the first step forward, everyone held their breath. It was the old man, but not the same old man from the day before. The well-cut suit, the confident look, the upright posture. He walked with the calm of one who has nothing to prove. A murmur ran through the crowd, growing like a wave. The manager stared, confused, trying to understand what he saw. His eyes blinked several times, as if trying to undo an illusion, but it was no illusion. It was pure and inescapable reality. Then the man took the microphone and, in a deep voice, began to speak. He said he has always believed that a person's true character is revealed in the way he treats those who can't seem to give him anything back. He also said that for many years he decided to observe his own company in disguise because he wanted to make sure that the values he preached still lived on in the corridors he had built with his own hands. He said that he had founded that company 35 years ago when no one believed that a technology startup could grow in that region. He talked about the sleepless nights, about the sacrifices, about the moments when he almost gave up, but he also talked about the promise he had made to himself, that he would never forget where he came from. The silence was absolute. Some understood, others don't. The manager, in a cold sweat, tried to hide the discomfort growing inside, feeling that his throat was drying out. With every word, the weight of truth approached like a mountain, until the old man calmly said that there was something very serious to be solved. He looked directly at the manager, and in that instant, all eyes turned to him, who had nowhere else to run. The manager felt the ground run away from under his feet. That couldn't be happening. He looked around, searching for some sign that it was a joke, a mess, anything that would undo the suffocating sense of shame that rose like fire through his chest. The old founder, however, did not look away. No aggressive words, no angry tone, just a serenity that made him even smaller. He said calmly that while he was mopping the floor, he heard too arrogant talk, laughter that masked contempt, and decisions that put ego above respect. He said that the day before, someone had the opportunity to show empathy, but chose to humiliate in public those he believed to be inferior. He didn't mention the name, and yet everyone already knew. Silence grew inside the auditorium like an invisible weight. People began to avert their eyes, each remembering a time when they, too, had ignored that man or treated others in the same way. Some recalled walking past him without saying good morning. Others recalled conversations interrupted as he approached to clear a table. There was a collective guilt hanging in the air, and every single person in there knew they were somehow complicit as well. The manager tried to speak, to open some justification, but the voice did not come out. With each attempt, he was swallowed by his own shame. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound had enough force to break through the wall of embarrassment that surrounded him. Then the founder told that he had created that company with the hope that it would be more than a business. It would be a legacy of values. He said seeing that kind of attitude was like watching cracks appear in the soul of what he built. And he stated that he did not need executives with degrees and jargon, but human beings with character. His voice was not loud, but every word echoed like silent thunder. He explained that over the years he had received hundreds of impeccable resumes, people with master's degrees from renowned universities, with international certifications, with brilliant portfolios, but that none of this mattered if the person did not know how to see the other as equal. He interrupted himself for a moment and, looking directly at the manager, said that respect cannot be learned in spreadsheets, but rather lived in small gestures. It was only then that he announced in a firm voice that that manager was no longer part of the company. The reaction came as a shock, a collective whisper of astonishment and relief. The man felt his legs weaken and, without the strength to argue, just lowered his head. His hands trembled slightly, and he clenched his fists, trying to hide despair. As he left, he saw the looks that had once admired him turn to disdain and reflection. Some colleagues who had laughed alongside him the day before now averted their eyes, ashamed to have been part of it. The old man remained silent until the door closed. Then he took a deep breath, and at that instant, the heavy air in the auditorium seemed to dissipate. He waited a few seconds, letting the sound of the former manager's footsteps completely disappear before continuing. But what no one expected was what would come next. The founder walked to the center of the stage, put the microphone aside for a moment, and simply stood there, looking at every face present. Then he took the microphone again and opened the story of his own life. He said that decades earlier, he had also been humiliated when he was just a cleaner trying to pay for evening studies at a small company. He recounted that his former employer treated him as if he were invisible, until the day that same man needed his help and was saved by the compassion he never expected to find. The story was long, full of details that seemed impossible to make up. He talked about the night his boss had a heart attack in the empty office late at night, and he was the only one who was there to rescue him. He talked about how he carried that man to his car, drove to the hospital, and stayed by his side until the family arrived, and about how, days later upon discharge, the boss did not say a single word of thanks, but only again treated him as invisible. But that experience didn't make him bitter, it made him more aware. His words weren't lessons, they were vivid memories. He talked about how power distorts the gaze, makes people believe that status defines value, when in fact it is the opposite. Value defines who deserves power. With each sentence, employees seemed to plunge into a state of collective consciousness, reflecting on their own attitudes. There were discreet tears on some faces. Others just kept their eyes fixed on the stage, absorbing every word, as if it was the first time they had heard something true. The old man explained that during the years he was away, he realized that the company was growing financially, but losing in humanity. The numbers were impressive, the profits record-breaking, but the stories that reached him were troubling. Employees falling ill from stress, people being fired without consideration, talents being wasted for lack of genuine recognition, and that upon returning, I wanted to look into each other's eyes and decide if that place was still worth fighting for. He said the best employees aren't always the ones who perform the best, but the ones they respect the most. The auditorium, once filled with anxiety, was now filled with silence and emotion. Some people wept quietly, touched not only by history, but by the memory of their own failures. Then he concluded that there was no shame in making a mistake, but rather in continuing to repeat the mistake. He looked at everyone tenderly and said that he believed in a new beginning, that the time of arrogance was over. He was given a standing ovation, not as a boss, but as someone who reminded others what it means to be human. The sound of clapping filled the space and seemed to heal every shred of injustice left on that floor. Days later, the old man walked again through the corridors, not as the man who cleaned the floor, but as someone who recovered the soul of a place. People now greeted him with genuine respect, and there was something different in the air, a new lightness that had seemed impossible before. The building was still the same, computers flashing, keystrokes filling the room, but what had changed was invisible. It was the way each look met, how each gesture carried a little more humanity. There were smiles in the hallways, longer conversations in the elevators, people stopping to really listen to each other. The former manager, in turn, quietly left the city, taking with him the bitter memory of that morning when he discovered that power without empathy is only a fragile disguise. No one knew exactly where he had gone, and few cared to ask. Some commented that they had seen him in another company, smaller, trying to start over. Others said he had left the country. But the truth is that he had become just another forgotten name, a lesson the company had learned the hard way. Meanwhile, the founder walked through each floor, talking to employees, listening to stories and remembering names. He made sure to stop by each department, to get to know the work of each team, to personally thank them for their contributions. He had a serene smile, no ostentation, just gratitude. In the cafeteria, an employee offered him a hot coffee, and he accepted with a small nod, saying that it was nice to feel the taste of simple things again. She smiled, touched, and commented that she had never imagined that the founder was so accessible. He replied that accessibility was not a favor, it was an obligation of those who lead. People began to realize that that gesture said more than any speech. He didn't need big meetings or elaborate presentations to show who he was. It was enough to be present, genuinely present. At the end of the day, before leaving, he returned to the lobby. The floor shone clean, reflecting the soft evening lights. For an instant, he put the bucket and cloth back in the corner, exactly where he used to leave them every morning. He was silent, watching the reflection on the floor, not of the powerful man, but of the human being who never forgot where he came from. He smiled, and in that smile there was peace, there was purpose. He knew that there was still a lot of work ahead, that changing a culture does not happen overnight, but he also knew that the first step had been taken. As he walked out the front door, he looked back one last time and saw the company logo lit up. That symbol, which had so often been associated only with profit and growth, now carried a new meaning. It was a symbol of second chances, of humanity recovered, of values that resisted time and the temptation of power. Then he muttered to himself that true greatness is not in the office he occupies, but in the way he treats whom no one sees. And then the phrase that would forever seal that story echoed in his mind, clear as the sound of a new beginning. The truth is that a man's character reveals itself when no one is looking.